The Queen of Sheba was a queen regnant who appears in the Bible. The tale of her visit to King Solomon has undergone extensive Jewish, Arabian and Ethiopian elaborations, and has become the subject of one of the most widespread and fertile cycles of legends in the Orient. Narratives. Bible. The Queen of Sheba came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices, and very much gold, and precious stones. Never again came such an abundance of spices as those which she gave to Solomon. She came to prove him with hard questions, all of which Solomon answered to her satisfaction. They exchanged gifts, after which she returned to her land. The use of the term hiddot or riddles, an Aramaic loanword whose shape points to a sound shift no earlier than the 6th century BC, indicates a late origin for the text, since there is no mention of the fall of Babylon in 539 BC. Martin Noth has held that the Book of Kings received a definitive redaction around 550 BC. Virtually all modern scholars agree that Sheba was the South Arabian kingdom of Saba, centered around the oasis of Marib, in present-day Yemen. Sheba was quite known in the classical world, and its country was called Arabia Felix. Around the middle of the first millennium BC, there were Sabians also in the Horn of Africa, in the area that later became the realm of Aksum. There are 5 places in the Bible where the writer distinguishes Sheba, the Yemenite Sabians, from Seba, the African Sabians. In Ps. 72-10 they are mentioned together. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. This spelling differentiation, however, may be purely factitious. The indigenous inscriptions make no such difference, and both Yemenite and African Sabians are there spelt in exactly the same way. The alphabetic inscriptions from South Arabia furnish no evidence for women rulers, but Assyrian inscriptions repeatedly mention Arab queens in the north. Queens are well attested in Arabia, though according to Kitchen, not after 690 BC. Furthermore, Sabian tribes knew the title of Mqtwyt, Makada or Makuada. The personal name of the queen in Ethiopian legend might be interpreted as a popular rendering of the title of Mqtwyt. The queen's visit could have been a trade mission. Early South Arabian trade with Mesopotamia involving wood and spices transported by camels is attested in the early 9th century BC, and may have begun as early as the 10th. The ancient Saba Kwwam temple, known in folklore as Maram Bilkas, was recently excavated by archaeologists, but no trace of Queen of Sheba has been discovered so far in the many inscriptions found there. Christian scriptures mention a queen of the south, who came from the uttermost parts of the earth, i.e., from the extremities of the then-known world, to hear the wisdom of Solomon, a mystical interpretation of the biblical Song of Songs, or Canticles, which was theorized to provide a literal basis for the speculations of the allegorists, makes its first appearance in the works of Origen, who wrote a voluminous commentary on the Canticles. In his commentary, Origen identified the female speaker, or bride, with the Queen of the South, of the Gospels, that is, the Queen of Sheba, who is assumed to have been Ethiopian. Other scholars have proposed that the couple in the book are Solomon and Pharaoh's daughter, and the marriage, or, alternatively, Solomon's marriage with an Israelitish woman, the Shulamite. The former was the favorite opinion of the mystical interpreters to the end of the 18th century, the latter has been favored since its introduction by John Mason Good in 1803. The female speaker is assumed to have been black due to a passage in Canticles 1-5, which the Revised Standard Version translates as, "I am very dark, but comely," as did Jerome. Alternatively, the New Revised Standard Version has, "I am black and beautiful," as the Septuagint. According to legend, the Queen of Sheba brought to Solomon the self-same gifts which the Magi would later bring to the Christ child. During the Middle Ages, Christians sometimes identified the Queen of Sheba with the Sibyl Saba. The Old Testament has held special significance for African Christians. Many identify with the Old Testament and its rituals, and this sometimes has brought them into conflict with missionaries who emphasized the Christian values and practices based on the New Testament and European cultural norms. Africans want to embrace the Old Testament literally, such as its marriage customs and its emphasis on community, and find inspiration and sustenance in the Exodus theme of liberation. 1-4. Agada. According to Josephus, the Queen of Sheba was the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia, and brought to Israel the first specimens of the balsam, which grew in the Holy Land in the historian's time. The Talmud insists that it was not a woman but a king of Sheba that came to Jerusalem, obviously intended to discredit existing stories about the relations between Solomon and the queen. The most elaborate account of the queen's visit to Solomon is given in the 8th century Targum Sheni to Esther. Hupo informed Solomon that the kingdom of Sheba was the only kingdom on earth not subject to him and that its queen was a sun worshipper. He thereupon sent it to Keturah in the land of Sheba with a letter attached to its wing commanding its queen to come to him as a subject. She thereupon sent him all the ships of the sea loaded with precious gifts and 6,000 youths of equal size, all born at the same hour and clothed in purple garments. They carried a letter declaring that she could arrive in Jerusalem within 3 years, although the journey normally took 7 years. When the queen arrived and came to Solomon's palace, thinking that the glass floor was a pool of water, she lifted the hem of her dress, uncovering her legs. Solomon informed her of her mistake and reprimanded her for her hairy legs. She asked him 3 or, according to the Midrash, other riddles to test his wisdom. The 11th century alphabet of Ben Sira avers that Nebuchadnezzar was the fruit of the union between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. In the Kabbalah, the Queen of Sheba was considered one of the queens of the demons and is sometimes identified with Lilith. First in the Targum of Job, and later in the Zohar and the subsequent literature. A Jewish and Arab myth maintains that the queen was actually a jinn, half human and half demon. In Ashkenazi folklore, the figure merged with the popular image of Helen of Troy or the Frau Venus in German mythology. Ashkenazi incantations commonly depict the Queen of Sheba as a seductive dancer. Until recent generations she was popularly pictured as a snatcher of children and a demonic witch. Islam. In the Quran, the queen is simply the Queen of the Saba. The story is partially similar to the Bible and other Jewish sources, though Hupo brought the news to King Solomon about Saba and that he found a woman who was the Queen of Saba, with her people worshipping the sun. Solomon sent a message with the Wupu to command them to come to him as Muslims. The queen asked her people for advice, then sent a present to Solomon which he refused to accept and sent back with her messengers, whereupon she appeared before him. Before the queen had arrived, Solomon had got her thrown to his palace with the help of one who had knowledge of the book. She could not fully recognize the throne, which had been disguised. She was invited to enter as Sarh, but when she saw it, she thought it was a pool, and she uncovering her legs, and finally accepted the faith of Solomon. The full story in Quran is in 27 Surat al-Nam, verses 15-44. Muslim commentators supplement the story at various points, using the Israelite literature from Jews converts as reference. The queen's name, not mentioned in Quran, is given as Bilkish, probably derived from Greek pi alpha lambda alpha kappa iota sigma, or the Hebraised Pilegesh, concubine. The demons at Solomon's court, afraid that the king may marry Bilkish, spread the rumor that the queen has hairy legs and the foot of an ass. Hence Solomon's ruse of constructing a glass floor which the queen mistakes for water, thus causing her to lift her skirts. Solomon then commands his demons to prepare a special depilatory to remove the disfiguring hair. According to some, he then married the queen, while other traditions assert that he gave her in marriage to a Tubber of Hamdan. Although the Quran have preserved the earliest literary reflection of the complete Queen of Saba story, there is no doubt that some of its commentators' narrative is derived from Jewish sources. Midrash. Bible stories of the Queen of Sheba and the ships of Ophir served as a basis for legends about the Israelites traveling in the Queen of Sheba's entourage when she returned to her country to bring up her child by Solomon. There is a Muslim tradition that the first Jews arrived in Yemen at the time of King Solomon, following the politico-economic alliance between him and the Queen of Sheba. However, that tradition is suspected to be an apologetic fabrication of Jews in Yemen later transferred to Islam, just like many other traditions. Coptic. The story of Solomon and the Queen was popular among Copts, as shown by fragments of a Coptic legend preserved in a Berlin papyrus. The Queen, having been subdued by deceit, gives Solomon a pillar on which all earthly science is inscribed. Solomon sends one of his demons to fetch the pillar from Ethiopia, whence it instantly arrives. In a Coptic poem, Queen Yesaba of Cush asks riddles of Solomon. Ethiopian. The fullest and most significant version of the legend appears in the 14th century Kebra-Nagast, the Ethiopian national saga. Here Menelik I is the child of Solomon and Makeda, from whom the Ethiopian dynasty claims descent to the present day, while the Abyssinian story offers much greater detail. It omits any mention of the queen's hairy legs or any other element that might reflect on her unfavorably. Based on the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, the Queen of the South is claimed to be the Queen of Ethiopia. In those times, King Solomon sought merchants from all over the world, in order to buy materials for the building of the temple. Among them was Tamrin, great merchant of Queen Makeda of Ethiopia. Having returned to Ethiopia, Tamrin told the queen of the wonderful things he had seen in Jerusalem, and of Solomon's wisdom and generosity, whereupon she decided to visit Solomon. She was warmly welcomed, given the palace for dwelling, and received great gifts every day. Solomon and Makeda spoke with great wisdom, and instructed by him, she converted to Judaism. Before she left, there was a great feast in the king's palace. Makeda stayed in the palace overnight, after Solomon had sworn that he would not do her any harm, while she swore in return that she would not steal from him. As the meals had been spicy, Makeda awoke thirsty at night, and went to drink some water, when Solomon appeared, reminding her of her oath. She answered, "Ignore your oath, just let me drink water." That same night, Solomon had a dream about the sun rising over Israel, but being mistreated and despised by the Jews, the sun moved to shine over Ethiopia and Rome. Solomon gave Makeda a ring as a token of faith, and then she left. On her way home, she gave birth to a son, whom she named Bene-Lakem. After the boy had grown up in Ethiopia, he went to Jerusalem carrying the ring, and was received with great honors. The king and the people tried in vain to persuade him to stay. Solomon gathered his nobles and announced that he would send his firstborn son to Ethiopia together with their firstborns. He added that he was expecting a third son, who would marry the king of Rome's daughter and reign over Rome, so that the entire world would be ruled by David's descendants. Then Bene-Lakem was anointed king by Zadok the high priest, and he took the name David. The firstborn nobles who followed him are named, and even today some Ethiopian families claim their ancestry from them. Prior to leaving, the priest's sons had stolen the Ark of the Covenant. After their leader Azarias had offered a sacrifice as commanded by one God's angel, with much wailing, the procession left Jerusalem on a wind cart leading carried by the archangel Michael. Having arrived at the Red Sea, Azarias revealed to the people that the ark is with them. David prayed to the ark and the people rejoiced, singing, dancing, blowing horns and flutes, and beating drums. The ark showed its miraculous powers during the crossing of the stormy sea, and all arrived unscathed. When Solomon learned that the ark had been stolen, he sent a horseman after the thieves, and even gave chase himself, but neither could catch him. Solomon returned to Jerusalem, and gave orders to the priests to remain silent about the theft and to place a copy of the ark in the temple, so that the foreign nations could not say that Israel had lost its fame. According to some sources, Queen Makeda was part of the dynasty originally founded by Zabasian Yangub in 1370 BC, with her grandfather and father being the last male rulers of the royal line. The family's intended choice to rule Aksum was Makeda's brother, Prince Murad, but his early death led to her succession to the throne. She apparently ruled the Ethiopian kingdom for more than 50 years. In the Ethiopian Book of Aksum, Makeda is described as establishing a new capital city at Azabar. Edward Ellendorf holds that Makeda is a corruption of Candace, the name or title of several Ethiopian queens from Meroe or Sheba. Disambiguation needed. Candace was the name of that queen of the Ethiopians whose chamberlain was converted to Christianity under the preaching of Philip the Evangelist in 30 CE. In the 14th century Ethiopic version of the Alexander Romance, Alexander the Great of Macedonia is said to have met a Queen Candake of Nubia. Historians believe that the Solomonic dynasty actually began in 1270 with the Emperor Yekuno Amlik, who, with the support of the Ethiopian Church, overthrew the Zagwe dynasty, which had ruled Ethiopia since sometime during the 10th century. The link to King Solomon provided a strong foundation for Ethiopian national unity. Despite the fact that the dynasty officially ended in 1769 with Emperor Ios, Ethiopian rulers continued to trace their connection to it, right up to the last 20th century emperor, Haile Selassie. According to one tradition, the Ethiopian Jews also trace their ancestry to Menelik I, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. An opinion which appears to be more historical is that the Falashis are the descendants of those Jews who settled in Egypt after the first exile, and who, upon the fall of the Persian domination on the borders of the Nile, penetrated into the Sudan, whence they went into the western parts of Abyssinia. The Luya people of Kenya call the Queen of Sheba Nakuti. The Yoruba Ijebu clan of Ijebu-Ode, Nigeria, claim that she was a noblewoman of theirs known as Oloibai Likasusungbo, which is similar to the name mentioned in the Islamic literature, Balkis. They also assert that a medieval system of walls and ditches, built sometime around the 10th century, was dedicated to her. After excavations in 1999, the archaeologist Patrick Darling was quoted as saying, "I don't want to overplay the Sheba theory, but it cannot be discounted. The local people believe it and that's what is important."